right, let me just unmute and turn the video on here.
Getting too risque.
So,
Our memories.
let me just.
Probably actually.
Okay. Room here. There.
Call to order the CRC Board of Directors meeting.
Chester Burton,
Here.
Neil McAllister,
Here.
Charles Finnan,
Present.
Gail Breen,
Here.
Michael Moore.
Here. Motion to adopt on March 26th. Sorry. Second. All in favor? All opposed? Hearing none, motion carried. No unfinished business, new business. A motion to approve the contract renewal for Mozart, Manzaro, and Scott. So moved. Second. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Hearing none, motion carried. New business. Motion to adjourn. No. Second. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Hearing none, motion carried. Call to order the Schoharie County Industrial Development Agency Board of Directors meeting.
All right, Chester Burton,
Here.
Neil McAllister,
Here.
Charles Finnan,
Here.
Gail Breen,
Here.
Michael Moore.
Here. Reading and motion to approve March 26, 2026 draft minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, motion carried. No unfinished business, new business. Motion to approve the contract renewal for Mozart, Manzaro, Scott.
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, motion carried. Okay, discussion of the freshwater wetland regulation case.
Yeah, so the next three items we don't really have a voting action on, but I just wanted to put them on the agenda so that we had an opportunity to talk about it. As you probably saw via email a few times, probably, the Albany County Supreme Court struck down the wetland regulations that we've been talking about, particularly with Shad Point. Shane and Pete Nickel and I, Shane Nickel, Pete Nickel, and I also had a meeting with DEC to talk about the impact on the county as a whole for the designation of and us being in a floodplain, essentially a flood zone under the new regulations and the new standards. Specifically, the meeting was mostly about where they came up with the numbers that they use as benchmarks, because if a soil is 2% permeable versus 10%, where did that come from? It turned out that the folks we were talking to were sort of more regional management and weren't the technical folks that could speak to that. So we were supposed to have a meeting later today, right after this meeting, to follow up on that. That meeting got canceled on Friday, right after I told you all that I had a hard stop. So I don't have a hard stop anymore. But the large point to all of that is that the floodplain designation was going to make about 80% of the county so that you couldn't develop it or get permits to develop it. Which we made the point to DEC that by the time you apply that filter, plus the filter of where utilities are, plus the geography, plus the availability, you might not even have one property in the county that is even an option, much less something that's going to happen. Which, DC's main priority is protecting the environment, not developing projects, which we totally understand. But it's sort of a weird paradox where Empire State Development is giving out grants to bring utilities to a site to help develop a site to make it shovel ready. And then when you do all of that and spend all of that money, state money, your own money, DC turns around and says, we're not going to permit a final build. They reiterated their point that if you have an end user, there's more workability on the wetland designation, which frankly, I think raises more questions than answers. I tried to get to the bottom of that in the meeting and said, well, are you saying if I come to you with somebody who wants to build a bakery and somebody with the same exact building footprint wants to build a battery acid manufacturer, that one would get approved potentially and one wouldn't? And the answer was yes, which to me is probably indicative of the problem they're having in court, right? Where it's sort of arbitrary on what goes and what doesn't go. So all that to say, the news of the wetland regulation going away would obviously be good news for development, but there's a lot that remains to be seen. There's sort of two paths forward that'll probably happen. One is either the state appeals the decision to a higher court, which if they do, then it stays the decision. So those regulations would remain, the new regulations would remain in effect until that is hashed out and the appeals are exhausted. The other thought is that the state might take the opportunity to step away from the unpopular regulation and say, ESD and all these other entities have been really saying how bad it is. Maybe we go back to the drawing board and start new regulations. If that happens, the decision would remain in place. So it would revert back to the old environmental regulations. The reason that matters for us is that would give us a window to complete some environmental reviews on Shad Point or potentially other projects that if we were able to accomplish that would then grandfather those sites into the system to allow us to continue to develop them even if new environmental regulations come back that aren't conducive to development. So to that point, we don't really know what's going to happen yet, and it's hard to act at the exact moment on that information. We're obviously monitoring that situation very closely. I spoke with the same county folks and Pete Nickel about being ready to act if we do have that window. Starting to talk to the land use attorneys and the engineering folks that could be of help there. Sort of get everybody on notice that we might have to act quick or might want to act quick if that window opens. But at the moment, it's sort of hard to know which way they're going to go.
Yeah.
I think usually I would say the state is going to appeal it. I think most of the time they fight for their original idea. Lately, the governor's been trying to back off of the energy, clean energy type of stuff. On the development side for solar and renewable energy. She's also been kind of saying that she wanted to find a way to ease this enforcement or give more clarity on leeway. So I think, given her comments, I think it's possible that they go back to the drawing board, which makes it sort of a unique situation for me. Because again, usually I would say they're just going to appeal the decision and they're going to fight it out and it's going to stay in place. And they're going to wait till they lose at the highest level. But I think given that there's a whole, economic development state agency, the business council, and some other powerful interests that oppose this, I think it's possible, especially in the political climate of an election year, that maybe, they go back to the drawing board.
But just not to interrupt you, but does the stay mean that the rule that put DEC as lead agency on the wetlands over Army Corps, does that still stay? Or does Army Corps revert to lead agency? And we could then pursue Army Corps to do the wetlands work.
So I think
or does anybody even know?
I don't know for sure. Let me start there. So I don't know for sure, but I think my understanding would be that it would revert to the old system if they don't appeal the court decision.
Yeah.
So
Which
Army
would be
Corps,
Army Corps would
yeah.
be the lead.
and then if they do, then it stays with DEC.
So that would be an interesting push on it through Army Corps. 'Cause
Yeah.
They held up, they waited with the change in the law and spent a year dragging their feet.
The other thing that could happen, and I hadn't thought about it until you asked that question, was I guess there is a third course of action. The state could enter into like a settlement type of negotiation with the people that sued them,
Yeah.
and decide to walk away from components of the regulation as well. So they could
Yeah.
enter into a MOU that they're not going to enforce certain parts of it, or that they're going to allow Army Corps to retake the
The lead.
Yeah,
on
so
certain sites.
I suppose that's a third option. That's a little, they just did that with the gun law that went to the US Supreme Court. They instead of waiting for the Supreme Court to strike it down, they came to an agreement to stop enforcing the part that they were being sued on. So there is precedent, I suppose.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, no, it's sort of a whole lot of words to say we don't know much right now, which isn't a great answer. But I've been in constant contact with folks. I mean, pretty much everybody I talk to every day is about that. I'll get to it in a little bit, I guess, but skipping ahead a little bit, this week I'm going to National Grid reception tonight to talk to them about some grant programs they have for site development. But I'm sure they'll have some insight probably too, as they're an interested party. And then tomorrow I'm going to Herkimer IDA for a brownfield development conference, where I'm sure there'll be a ton of folks in the industry that hopefully we can hear from and what they're hearing as well and report back. The ARPA funds update. So sort of piggybacking off of the court case discussion, the ARPA funds, previously we talked about it, the county administrator's position was, you could only return it for broadband due to the encumbrance that they say happened back in 2024, and then or continue to spend it on SharePoint, which obviously up until recently that was a pretty dead proposition. For now, I guess it depends on what happens with the court case still on what the opportunity for ARPA will be. If the state comes out and says they're not appealing the decision, then the door would be back open for SharePoint to move forward as it was initially planned.
How long are those funds good for?
Till the end of the year, we have to spend it by.
This is May.
Yep. So yeah, there's still a lot of problems there. I discussed with them about asking for an extension if that's a thing people do. They said it is at the U.S. Treasury. I mean, so we can we'll explore our options there, of course, but it's sort of remains to be seen too. I think depending on
Right.
You have to have an argument before you can go ask for the extension, and the argument sort of rests on what happens with the court case there. So
if we were to put a bid out to put the water line and the pump station in on 145, would those, as long as we had a contract document signed before the end of the year,
no,
the money's got to be.
So what we were told was we would have had to have had that agreement in place by the end of 2024 to spend it by the end of 2026. So the change we would be asking for would be like an exemption or an extension on that based on what happened with the wetland regulations that kind of killed the whole timeline. Like,
Right.
essentially the argument would be that we didn't just sit around and sit on the money. We stopped because the project got killed by a regulation that now got shot down in court, right?
Right.
So that would be sort of the conversation and the angle. What happens would be, up to them, of course, but that would be the attempt to keep it alive.
If we gave the money back to the county for broadband, they would still have to spend it by
The end of the year.
31st.
Yeah. And we've talked to them about that as well, to know the timelines of what it would need to be if that was to be forced, the hand that was forced. They say like 2 months. So in October, they would be able to,
Be able to spend it.
yeah. Which I mean, honestly, even that, I think we could probably talk more about with them because I think my understanding was it was just a journal transfer essentially. So I don't know why that couldn't happen even faster, but I'd have to learn more about their process.
Equipment rather than labor. They can easily buy what equipment they need.
Yeah.
The first of the year, even if they don't implement or expand the project till after the first of the year.
Put it towards a bond that they already took out. I mean, it's a pretty quick lump sum payment I think you could make there. I'm still kind of circling around on that, trying to get more details. There's a lot of things that have been flying around that no one knows the genesis of. So it's sort of a little bit like playing whack-a-mole, but we're working on it. Of course, the documentation all exists somewhere, so we just trying to hunt down the people that have that and check our boxes there. But that's, again, all that to say, I guess there's still a little bit up in the air there on what our real possibilities and options are going to be. And the director's update, I will send you guys a copy. It was the formatting got all messed up for some reason. When I tried to print it, it was this big. So I will figure that out. But previously, we talked about the Birches. They had reached out, I think, in retrospect, now that I've had some conversations, I think they reached out to pretty much everyone they could think of to see if they could get help. I talked to Colleen and Peter in the village, as well as Rose Chase at RPC. RPC is working with them and the state to make sure that they still have their vouchers intact for the affordable housing. The village is willing to work with them on, coming to a solution on their tax bill, essentially. It sounds like they were of the belief that they could keep their tax exemption that was in place at the property for the previous owners, but due to them being a private entity, they're not eligible to do that. So they might need to, one route that they could pursue a pilot would be through the IDA, which would, be construction or be repurposing or refurbishing, I should say, capital project there. I don't know if they want to do that or not. They said they were going to do capital improvements, but they didn't seem to have a lot of specifics. So where it's left right now is that the village is going to meet with them to see what they need and what they want to do. And then they're going to circle back with us to see if we can be helpful or if they need our help. So that was good. We were able to make a good connection there. There's also some question on whether or not the sale's actually been completed yet. So we might be ahead of ourselves a little bit on that front. I know they're checking with the county real property to see if the deed had been filed and all of that too. So sort of monitoring that, but not much to do on that front right now. On URA, we've talked about that a lot, obviously. Essentially, it boils down to its status quo. We're still waiting to hear from New York City DP and as well as URA to get clarity on whether or not there was some question on whether or not they were going to file a new application with a new environmental form, or if they're just going to update their environmental form for their current application. It seemed like we were playing telephone a little bit between the two entities. So Shannon reached out to both of them last week, say like, which way are we going here, just so that we know whether or not we need to consider the current application or if they're going to withdraw it and submit a new one. Don't have an update on that yet, but that's sort of where that stands. Let me just check my notes real quick here because I know I'm forgetting something. Oh, Grove Street, yes. So everyone's favorite as well. So we got the closing docs signed. We got them over to them. They signed the documents. They wrote us a check for roughly $3,000 too much, which I would be happy to take, but with our financial reporting, it doesn't quite work that way. So we let them know they're gonna cut us a new check. That should be resolved this week. And then we'll be completely done with that, and they'll be on their way. Talked to Rose a little bit about their plan for that. They still have, a lot of market studies and engineering and everything to do, but she said she's really hoping to get going on that in the fall this year. So maybe depending on how fast everything moves, probably breaking ground in the spring next year for whatever they can get approved, essentially. Wetlands, yep. The other thing was the CPL Engineering had sent in a proposal for some services that they were hoping they could provide us. There was a couple things that essentially we've already had done through the work that we did at Shad Point. So I sent that back to them to have them revise their idea, and then we would have to solicit opinions from other engineering firms too, because we can't just pick one. But essentially, what they're looking at and what they want to do in a nutshell, and I'll share it once it's once I get the revised version, is building off of all the due diligence that was done before when we selected Shad Point as a place to do site development, picking sort of the next swath of properties, maybe the next 5 that were graded initially as the most developable or the best subjects. And kind of number one, going back and updating that, making sure that they're still in good shape, viable. There's still the utilities there that they thought there was, and then doing a deeper dive, a deeper analysis on, what exactly would it cost to bring utilities there, or does it already have them? Is it flat enough? How much site work would it need? So that we could get a real plan of the budget. And then once we have that, we could go pursue Fast New York grant style Empire State Development funds to develop that next project, essentially. So it's sort of, I guess, the next step of trying to, obviously we're still working on Shad Point and ARPA, but then, sort of what's next and how do we begin to think
Only
about
like 3 or 4 or 5 other properties that were really good ones.
Yeah,
I remember.
yeah, I have the list. It's kind of a complicated question, right? Because there is technically more than that, right? But some of them are 3 acres,
Right.
2 acres and stuff that like you can't effectively do anything with. So to your point, once you weed all of that down and you say, there's 12 points of 12 metrics that they evaluated, how many of them were 12 out of 12? How many of them were 11 out of 12? For the ones that were 11 out of 12, why was it 11 out of 12? Because there's obviously a big difference between losing a point because you're too far away from the exit at 88 and losing a point because you don't have electric at your site or can't get electric at the site because it's too far from the station. So yes, yeah, like weeding through that as well. I've begun to sort of do that in my own mind so that we can, for our site inventory, to have our own list of when people ask, what are we interested in?
Just
here's
think
some ideas.
what we've done, all the work we did at Shad Point to get nowhere at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Now we look at another 2 or 3 properties. Process is ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. Yeah,
Absolutely ridiculous.
yeah,
And why? What I don't quite understand is why don't the people, these organizations, the state, understand why people are moving out and why businesses aren't moving in? It just makes no sense.
you sound like me in every meeting I have. I feel like a broken record. So sometimes I can't remember if I've already said this to you or if I just say it all day, every day. But it's exactly that. And I think you see the tangible evidence, right?
Of course.
And by that I mean we have these properties that anyone, this is America, right? Anyone could buy, anyone could choose to spend the money to develop. They don't because it doesn't pencil out, right? There's a lot of people who are successful business people who aren't builders, right? They're happy to move in if you have something ready, but they don't want to build the place themselves and deal with all that entails. And that's pretty much every conversation I have. I talked to a guy that's moving a welding shop that I actually, in a small world, know from my coaching days of rowing. His welding shop was right next to our boathouse in the Port of Albany. I hadn't talked to him in like 10 years. But I was at an event the other day, and somebody from Albany told me he was moving to Schoharie County. So, oh, well, I know something about that. So I talked to him, and it's the same kind of thing. He was asking, like, do you have anything that they're trying to repurpose? Any buildings that are empty that could be repurposed, or do you have anything that's shovel ready? And it's like, no. I mean, if we did, right, I think every county in the state is. If you do, like, that's very attractive. Someone's going to take it quickly. So trying to get there, right, is sort of what I think where we can help with grants and funding and plans. But to your point, like, it's not an easy lift. I mean, you're gonna miss sometimes, and it's gonna cost a lot of money when you do. And for a small county, or
look at all the ARPA funds we've used and have gotten virtually nowhere.
yeah,
Think of that.
yeah.
It's terrible.
And part of the lesson that I think I'm trying to take away from that and learn there is, let's get to know faster, right? And so, I mean, what I mean by that is, like, on the next one, let's do that delineation soon, right? It's one of our early steps, because if that's the holdup, then there's no point in doing the water lines there and spending, doing the engineering for
All
that.
the engineering money.
And
right?
so,
Right.
yeah.
Just wasted. Yeah.
So I think it's sort of helped us reorder our process to moving forward.
And you would think the engineering company would know that.
Right. Well, they do now, especially, hopefully
Yeah.
they do now. Yeah. So it's, I think it'll be interesting going forward to see if, people are getting them through, and even us, because if you miss once or twice more, it's going to be even harder to start to keep convincing people to want to do the next one. Right. And that's sort of going full circle back to the conversation with DEC, sort of what I was trying to tell them. In their mind, they would like to have an end user identified who has a specific plan. I want to put a 700,000 square foot building on Shad Point, and therefore I need it to sit this way, and therefore I need you to help me, with the buffer right there. And that doesn't happen because these people don't want to be part of that. They don't want, if you run a private business, right, you don't want to spend all the money to the due diligence to find the site, the waste, to have it killed. And really, I think the only industry I'm aware of that's really doing that is renewable energy. And it's because they sort of have to through their siting. It's a similar type of problem.
Has any, I've heard anything about the old Walgreens store? What's happening there?
No. Down here?
Yeah.
No, I haven't heard anything about that.
That's a nice big store.
Right.
Yeah, I can ask though at our next, the president at the college has a economic development meeting where Warner and RJ are usually there. I can ask if they've heard anything too.
Or, who has control of the building and what are they looking for financially? Because then we could help market that.
Right.
Well, I'm happy. Yeah, to your point, I can look up the tax map and contact the owner too. That doesn't hurt.
The money that has been spent already on Shad Point in terms of engineering, we shouldn't have to do that again if that should pick up, right?
Right. Yeah, a lot of that was due diligence that would be useful if the site opens back up and we could pick up where we left off. And I talked to them about that specifically with MRB, because we had the contract with them in 2024. They were initially saying that they, being the county administrator for the ARPA funds, was saying anything you do there would have to go through that contract because it was the only one that was in place in 2024. So I've talked to them about that idea. I think if it opens up, then again, back to talking to the U.S. Treasury about, specifically what can we do and what can we not do. Because those answers are kind of lacking. It's sort of, well, I wouldn't do this because you could get audited and they might determine that you weren't supposed to do that. So I think somebody there should be able to tell us more directly,
Black and white.
yeah, this is a yes or this is a
Here's
no.
our money, here's what you
And
do.
yeah, I don't think that's an unreasonable question in my mind. And I'm happy to have that conversation. Again, I've already broached the subject to sort of lay the foundation. But yeah, right. I mean, that's part of the appeal of if Shat Point was to open back up, is that we have done all of this stuff for it.
But would Van Dykes be willing to, the estate, or how is that being handled now? Would they even get back into the negotiation?
Yeah, I mean, that would be question number one, right? I mean, before we spend any more money, that's where you have to go with it, of course, for sure. I don't know. I don't know the answer. I haven't been told yes or no. I haven't gotten any good or bad feedback, right? But it's it's something that we're going to find out. And I'm in the process of trying to contact them to make sure that we can start that conversation before we're ready to go, right? We would like to have an answer before we need one, right?
At least to update them on
Yeah,
where you are with the state
and the
so that they
situation.
know, right?
Yeah.
Because he may decide he wants to do something on his own.
Mhm.
And it's only fair to let them know where things stand.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not only that, but the fact that he can't do anything on his
Right.
own.
Mhm.
Right.
There's only got a couple parcels of about 2 acres in there. When they got
Yeah.
all done.
Oh, right, with the
They
delineation
might be
now.
able to
Yeah,
put 2 houses on, all that
Right.
acreage. So
Yeah.
he needs to understand that.
I believe.
It would be his advantage to make it happen.
And that we're still working for him.
Right.
In that regard, we're working to try to make that a viable alternative.
Yeah.
So that he sees that the effort is coming from us to try to support him and not feel like we're just pulled the rug out from underneath.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, and I talked about it on Friday. I don't need to rehash the whole conversation, but I think in my mind too, I'm trying to keep every possibility open there as well, right? If there's a piece of it that ends up working for development, then we'll consider that too, right? We don't, the last conversation that I heard of with the Van Dyke side of the property was that they were kind of waiting to see if what they could do, sort of holding on to it. It didn't sound like building a couple houses was attractive.
That wasn't going to give them the return they're looking for.
Right. Yeah, I guess that's the best way to say it. And but that could change obviously. So it is important to follow up on, and we're working on that as well. I think. Oh, the only other thing I had going on that I was going to tell you about this week was the business plan competition at the college. They have it on Friday. I'm the guest judge. Pretty excited to see that. The winner gets, I think, $15,000 towards their business. So should be pretty fun. Glad Scott asked me to participate. So should be good.
Question on Raymond Holdings. Have any follow-up on that?
The
Site across from Shad Point.
No, I haven't heard more either on that. We're working on getting in contact with them as well.
Art, have you heard anything about that?
Are you talking about the warehouse site that was approved?
Yeah.
We've heard nothing. And I think that's a very important point that this board should be considering, is that we have an approved site with water, sewer, and gas, and nobody's come to town.
Right.
I mean, that's very important. That's why it's essential at exit 22 and 23 to have the water there. We need to be shovel ready. And as far as your second and third sites are concerned, my dad's property at Forester was considered number 1 until they switched to number 2, which was at my suggestion to go to the exit, because that's your connectivity. And as far as the second site is concerned, I think, Leo, you were talking about that. You're not going to see a box on Forester Road. I'm not going to put a box next to the golf course. I think that's ridiculous. And as far as planning goes, you got on the planning board. Mike, I took your seat on the planning board. You cannot deposit all of that traffic off of Forester Road in the middle of the village. This is our home. To your point, as far as engineering is concerned, what their intention is, or these guys are from Saratoga. You know, we live here. Their intention is to make a profit. You know, when you make a suggestion to go to a second site such as Forester, you know, you have to look at all the other aspects, ancillary aspects from a planning perspective. And depositing that kind of intensity and density to the road in front of Walmart is ridiculous. It makes no sense as far as the aesthetic,
Choke
the
point
connection.
Mhm.
Yeah, to connection with, we have to be aware of the fact of what we're putting next to the golf course. That's a beautiful piece. Why would we do that with a box next to it? So I think we should be very careful about that. I don't think we have too many 2 or 3 sites down the road. I think it's 23, it's 22, it's connectivity, and it's important to not lose focus on that. Mike, you've talked about a pump house. Well, there's a development in our planning board. We're on the final stages of approving at 67 homes on the end of the old Mill Springs Road. Remember before ID8, there was that road? And it's been in the news recently. We're probably going to get Article 78 because the local community is not too receptive to it, but I think the project's going to go through. There's a pump house to be placed there. I talked to Brendan Becker from Lamont. He indicates that we already have a pump house. We could then do a horizontal bore underneath I-88, getting to the south side of I-88 for the township of Cobleskill. That would provide us with some of the infrastructure necessary to accomplish what we need to accomplish. And I have called Joanne Crum concerning George's property, and to have them be made aware of what has transpired in the last 2 weeks. So, and I have made an effort to contact that individual. I don't know if this board recognizes or knows this, but I do own 116 acres just to the west of the Georgia property. I did not partake in this activity because I really wanted to see how this board reacted and how proactive and committed you are to doing this. It would be a travesty to see our ARPA funds be reallocated to broadband. A wonderful project, but I think it's important for us. We've spent a lot of time with Peter Fairweather, with MRB, focusing in on that area. I think it's important. But to travel back to what you were talking about with that 87,000 square foot warehouse, one of the things that's important about that is that we were approached on the planning board in September, late September. By the end of December, we had an approved project. We worked 60 days prior to them coming in one meeting, we were able to approve that. Now, that was a pretty extensive review. It demonstrates to the community that we can execute. Our board really does work quite quickly at this point. That, I think, Amazon was 300 days. When Leo and I were on the board for Lowe's, that was almost 600 days. So, and it didn't come. We actually reviewed that to death. And that was $434,000 of reoccurring land in school. That was 125 jobs, albeit not the greatest jobs, but it was still 125 jobs. Now, that was 20 years ago. It's a travesty that that didn't go through. Unfortunately, Leo and I were on that. We did the best we could.
Down the road.
And it went to Glenville. So, I mean, there are consequences to not executing. And we, at our planning board currently, we have the ability to do that. And I think that's a very, very important part. You guys do your part, but eventually comes to us, and we have to be able to do that. And I think I have faith that my board can execute if given a project. We were very proactive about it. But I think we already have a pump house.
Yeah, I think that's, we talked about it Friday. I think that's excellent piece to what we're trying to do here, right? When somebody comes to the IDA and they're considering a project, they obviously have to go through planning too, right? And part of that is if it's faster, it's more attractive, right? It's
It's absolute
business,
But to your point, no one has come. We have an approved,
Right.
golden thing here with all the environmentals done. It's ready to go. It's shovel ready, and nobody's showing. Now, was it marketing? I'm not exactly sure. What is it about our area that we're not attracting individuals? The pharmaceutical location in Rensselaer, when they expanded, where did they go? They could have went anywhere. They went to Saratoga. They didn't come here. There's an image issue. So it's just not water and sewer and jobs and tax revenue. We have to change our image here. And one of the ways we're doing is we're trying to demonstrate to the developers that we can execute. I'm actually chairing the rewrite for the comp plan in the township of Cobleskill. We are considering to expand the schedule of uses for Joshua project. And I know that's something that you've talked about. And so that there's that area of our town is expanding. We have Adones, which had Taste of Europe. We have a Joshua project out there. Once you bring water and sewer to that location, it changes the entire dynamic of that spot. And so it's just not George's property. And when you're bringing water and sewer, I'd like this board to consider you're bringing it to another location that I think has a tremendous potential. The north side of 145 across from George's property, all the way down that corridor as you're going east is definitely developable. Currently it isn't. And unless we have the amenities, the utilities there, you're not going to see it happen. It's 1,400 feet away. It might also be 14 miles away because you have to be there. And even if we have it at that one location, it isn't moving. So we really have to have it shovel ready, or I don't think it's going to work. And in talking to Warner, we all feel collectively with Shane that if we have a transformational project, that could facilitate the entire corridor down Route 7, the Tusamas property, the John Adams property, the NARC farm, all of those locations. And DEC is definitely overstepped here. I mean, I think Kathy's looking for a location to hide at this point with the ESD. There's a lot of pressure being placed on that. It's definitely going to change. I don't know when the timing is on it though.
Right. Yeah. I don't know either, but I do know that to your point, there is a lot of pressure being placed. It's everyone's saying it. It's not unique to Schoharie County. We might have a very glaring example because of the ARPA side of how much money we spend, and there was state grants involved in National Grid as well. So I mean, there was a lot of funding that was secured for the site, a lot of work done, and I try not to make it all about Shad Point at every meeting, but it's with them. But it's the most obvious example of what happens when you pass something that has, whether an intended or unintended consequence, it kind of broke it mid-process, and there was no way when you started the process to foresee that was going to derail the middle of your development, and it would have happened anywhere. Pretty much, very likely would have happened anywhere, even if you had picked another site because of the 80% coverage of the floodplain, the flood zone once the regulation hit. But I guess to circle back on all of it, I think I said to start on Friday. My biggest thing is like try not to close any of the doors. Right, let's leave all the options open. If even to his point about owning the property next to it, if there's something with the section there that was okay with the wetland regulation into his property, like let's explore that too if somebody's interested, or we can find a project that makes sense and fits there. There's a lot of room there too, to your point. And so even with the gentleman I was starting to talk about that's moving his welding company, unique needs. He'd like to have something he could move into, right? But understanding that he has sort of a weird footprint for a typical business. His shop is only like 20,000 square feet. That's not impossible to find a place that you can put a 20,000 square foot, building in, but then he needs 5 acres to put the stuff that he's welding on, so it's okay. That's okay too. That's not insane either. But, does it make sense to move a 20,000 square foot building into a site that was permitted for 87,000 square feet? I don't know, right? So like my point is it's all worth exploring, but it might not all work out, right? So it's trying to keep it moving on that. And then I guess I would say on the funding side for ARPA, it's not the only source of funding, right? It's just not. There's state grants we can pursue for proper things. ESD's itching to help people because they know what happened with DEC. I'm supposed to meet with somebody from ESD tomorrow in Herkimer at the conference to talk about what funding opportunities might be available for us. And it might, through that process, we might be able to solve some of our problems if we were able to get a separate grant from ESD, then it might not have the same constraints that ARPA had, and we might be able to just, take care of the confusion there or the issue. It's hard to know. I mean, there's a lot moving around, but we're monitoring it all, and hopefully we'll have some clarity soon on some of the state actions that would open the door for us to move forward as well.
How many days do they have to make a decision as to whether to appeal or not?
I believe, and I didn't get my law degree, right?
Yeah.
But I believe it's 30.
30.
Yeah. So, but the only question I don't know is if it's when does the clock start, right?
Yeah.
Does it count Sundays? Sometimes there's like weird counting with state laws on that type of stuff. But either way, it should be roughly 30 days.
Pretty soon, right?
Yeah. Yep. And I think, part of the other compounding issue is there's no state budget right now, right? So that's sort of taking the wind out of the room on them talking about that, and might get wrapped up into that even. So it's
Right. Well, at least by our next meeting.
We should know.
Something clear.
yes. Yeah. I hope so. That would be nice for everybody involved.
Yeah, I'm concerned to some extent about the ARPA funds and the what ifs. So we put it off till next month, and the what if we put it off to another month,
Right.
and then, well, maybe they'll extend it. I'm real uncomfortable.
Well, the county's not gonna let us do that.
No,
Yeah,
Yeah, no, I plan to start the conversation with the Treasury on whether or not there could be an extension soon. I don't see why we can't do that simultaneously, why we wait for the answer on the possibilities. And then we'll have to go from there pretty soon. Have a plan, right? At least, because to your point, time's ticking.
well, you better,
So-
because they'll take forever to decide.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, exactly. Everything has to happen.
What's a hard date with the county?
Pardon?
What's a hard date with the county?
Well, I don't know.
They said October 1, but that was when we were talking about it probably around January or December. So I'd have to double check, make sure that nothing has changed there.
Yeah, I would be surprised if they let us go that long.
Yeah.
We'll see.
but I would get an update from them.
Yeah, no, it's funny because we did talk about it right before, like almost 3 days before the court case came out, and sort of threw everything back into confusion. But yeah, we'll have to talk to them again as well.
All right.
Art, do you have anything else for us?
Not really, but I'm very impressed with it. And I think your observation about who's got jurisdictional authority with Army was a very good point. I don't know the answer to that question.
No.
That's a really good one.
Be nice to say, hey, would you guys come in and do your part now?
Very good.
While the state's trying to decide,
Right.
that'd be even better. Then you'd have that part done.
Very good
They
point.
still have to look at it, right?
Do we have anything else to come before the board?
Maybe determining a date for next month. I know I have a conflict with the original. Thursday the 21st, that was the one.
Okay. Sorry, I left my phone over there. So I
That's
didn't
okay.
check. Thank
We
you.
won't make you
Yeah.
walk around.
Hobble around again. Yeah.
I mean, I'm only me, I'm only one person.
Well, no, we can move it if we need to. I just. Let me make sure I don't have anything. It was supposed to be the 21st of May.
That was when you gave out
Yep.
that original.
Yep. Yeah, because we usually stuck with Thursdays, I
Right,
think.
and usually the third Thursday, which generally would be fine, but it's just this month, it's not looking fine.
Want to go to the next week?
28th, maybe?
I won't.
Okay, all right,
Well, we don't have to meet on Thursday.
Right.
that's true.
We do it Tuesday again.
The 19th,
How's that work?
that's okay with me.
I'm looking Tuesday, the 19th, I'm like, Gloria, that's clear.
How about the 26th?
Oh, no, I meant the 19th. book.
Yeah, I know. How about
Okay.
the 26th?
26 might be better for me.
Yeah, we're just coming back from Chicago on the 26th.
All right, we'll do it on a Wednesday. Either the 20th or the 27th. That work for anybody?
Twenty would be better for me.
I can do it.
Like that work.
Morning's fine.
20th at 9 a.m.
20th?
All right. Then we just need a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none,